folk of Alexander, and some of Hercules, of Hector and Lysander, and such great names as these. But of all...
Hello and welcome to today's mech overview. Today we're going to be looking at one of the Wolf's Dragoon medium mech of choice, just because it's what they were actually given when they came to the Inner Sphere. The Hoplite is one of those things that's just there, I believe. It's not one of the mech that you're going to be hunting for. It's not one of the mech that's the most fancy and rare out there either. It's just one of those things that is around that people are going to be using because they have them, and that they're very simple to fix and very simple to deploy. So let's get into it. The Hoplite is one of those mechs whose career started during the reunification war, where quite a few new mechs and new machines started being introduced. The Starleague and their friends moved in to beat up all the periphery states and all rogue states and rogue agents into submission at the time, and they needed all sorts of mechs to do it because it was the best thing they could afford and deploy. The modernization of warfare at the time led to battle mechs being the yardstick for ground warfare. Roles taken up usually by light vehicles and medium vehicles were being replaced by battle mechs in large number. One such role is really infantry support and close support, which is a role that things like the Mackie, the Thunderbolt, and the Orion can't really do, or if you have them do, it might not be performing as well as you'd want. A lot of support mechs at the time were the LRM carriers, while you had the assault mechs being your battering rams. So something to help out the infantry when it was needed was probably required. The first complete Hoplite came out of Martinson Armaments factories in about 2578 to fulfill that basic role of giving punch to an infantry unit if needed. It didn't need to be fast, so at 55 ton it only has a 220 engine in it. What it needed, though, was to be tough, so the infantry had something to anchor themselves around, so it has 11.5 ton of standard armors. The original 4A and, well, the modern 4C basically mount a Luxor HV AC-10 with 1 ton of ammo and a Conan 5 rack LRM. It's a pretty basic weapon setup, but it'll do what it's supposed to do. And since it's a mech, well, once the ammo runs out and you're supporting the infantry, well, you can still kick tanks over with those big feet of yours. The very weird thing about the Hoplite is the fact that it carries 16 heat sinks. In my opinion, and the opinion of many other engineers out there, it's because the mech was originally set up to be using a PPC instead of that AC-10, but something happened during development. I'm not sure if it's a basic military-industrial complex grift, or just the fact that PPCs were getting rare because they were being mounted on bigger mechs. But they replaced it with an AC-10, which doesn't generate enough heat to warrant those 16 heat sinks. Same with that LRM-5, it just doesn't generate a whole lot of heat. So we're really not sure of where that comes from. You'll see a lot of those 4A, 4Cs. I mean, there's barely any difference between the two, so you might not notice it. Have some of those heat sinks stripped off to add ammo to either of the weapons. Speaking of PPC, well, the Hoplite 4B is what would become the standard for Hoplites going forward if you look at the development of the weapon. And I'm pretty sure it was actually the original intent of the design team in the end. In terms of performance, it's your basic Hoplite, but the weapons are, well, different enough. Your main gun is replaced with a Magna L-Star PPC, one of the most common PPC out there, and the missile launcher system is replaced with a Mitchell Systems 15 rack LRM with 16 full volleys of missiles. Now the heat sinks start being a little bit more relevant. You do have a minimum range on both of those weapons, so if you're really doing close support for the infantry, it might not be wonderful. But if you're actually just doing support for infantry, you're going to be standing behind the infantry, and that PPC is going to be able to come to bear fairly easily, and those missiles are going to be able to bombard things. So really, I have a feeling that something weird happened during the development and the production of the original Hoplites. This was supposed to be your original model, and the 4A, 4C is what actually came out of factories due to a variety of factors that were outside of everybody's control. And that was it. Basically, the Hoplite stayed as it was during the entire Starleague era. Nobody did any other upgrades or updates. At least that we know of. There's bound to be a few people that changed things around, did some of the modernization by putting an LB10X on there, you know, the standard stuff. But as far as the military goes, those were the two hoplites that were available. It was satisfactory. It didn't cost all that much and could be put into service in large amounts with a very small amount of training for the pilots. It was serving aptly in the SLDF until the factories were destroyed during the Amaris coup, which ensured the design would probably die off during the Succession War. Unlike other designs, there was nobody to catch up the slack. There was nobody that wanted to produce it in any significant amount outside of it, and it simply died off, basically. Another main issue as to why it kind of died off is just how many were actually taken by the SLDF during the Exodus. Really, it wasn't until the Wolf Dragoon showed back up in the Inner Sphere that the Hoplite actually showed back up. The Hoplite, however, was in use during the Pentagon Civil War and the Operation Klondike that came afterwards, when the clans were basically being founded. We only have some battle ROMs and some gun cam footage from that era thanks to some of our clan contacts. We really don't have too much information, but we know that there's a few things that came up. There's a version of the Hoplite 4B which was produced, which is actually quite interesting, which would be the 4BB. It would basically, with that kind of designation, you'd think it's a Royal Regiment version of the Hoplite, but it was never in service in the actual SLDF. The heat sinks are replaced with double heat sinks, and the PPC is swapped with an ER-PPC. You no longer have that minimum range, but you do generate quite a bit more heat. And the LRM rack is tied to an Artemis 4 firing control, giving you better accuracy. All in all, good upgrades. And you get a Guardian ECM to help out with electronic warfare, case to protect the ammo, and a full-on anti-missile system. We replicated this with Inner Sphere parts, more or less, using a snub-nose PPC on a few 4Bs and a few hoplites that people wanted to have energy weapons on. It's a pretty decent upgrade and a pretty good brawler mech kind of way, but there are better options in the 55-ton range, unless that's the mech you have, which was the case during Operation Klondike. Clans El Orsis in its infancy also made a variant of the C-Series, the CB, which replaces the AC-10 and the LRM rack with a Gauss rifle and a 6-tube SRM, with a skin of ferrofibrous around it. I've never saw one, but I wouldn't say it's a bad design at 55 tons with a Gauss rifle and an SRM-6 when things get dicey at closer range. Pretty sure it's rather efficient, just not a thing that we've ever had to deal with. When the Wolf Dragoons showed back up in the Inner Sphere, they brought a bunch of Hoplite Cs with them, but when they got cut off after 30-20 or so from the clan homeworld, all the Hoplites that they had, well, required a few little updates. The main thing they did was the HOP4D, which is probably the Hoplite you've heard about or seen out there. The very simple change, you take out that Luxor HV and replace it with a Midron XL LBX10AC, which is a little bit lighter, allows you to use cluster rounds, and as such, it has 2 tons of ammo, one for clusters and one for slugs. This is one of those cases where you'd probably would have wanted to have a ferrofibrous skin on it and put some cases to protect the ammo. One of those situations where the Hoplite could have been upgraded a little more. As such, there is technically an FRR refit for the Hoplite. It's not an official thing. It's a thing that we've done a lot of times, and we've been doing it since the 30-50s. We put a ferrofibrous skin on because that's a thing that we mass produce around there, and we strip a few of those pointless heat sinks. We replaced the 10 class autocannon with an Ultra 5 class and the missile launcher for a 15 rack, but with 2 tons of ammo in case protected bins. It's not fancy, it gets the job done. I'm not a huge fan of it either, but we've got the plans for it, and it's a matter of a couple of days, maybe a week, to get one refitted because it's fairly straightforward. The Wolf Dragoon have kept building the Hoplite or rebuilding the Hoplite over the years, and the most recent version would be what I call the Hoplite Mark C. It starts with 10 tons of ferrofibrous alloy and double heat sinks, the clan kind, so you start with already a good base. The main gun is an Ultra 10 class autocannon backed by the 15 rack LRM, so it's a bit of an hybrid between your B and your C. And it actually complements this with a pair of medium pulse laser and an ER medium laser. Probably would have put a small pulse laser instead of that ER medium to be able to take out infantry. I'm just an engineer that knows what battlefields look like. I'm not an expert like the Wolf's Dragoons engineers, I am sure. At the other end of the spectrum, the Clan Jade Falcon are stuck in that forever war with the Kellhounds around Ark Royal, and they decided that they needed a cheap mech to replenish their forces, and they turned to the Hoplite. This new version of the Hoplite uses ballistic reinforced armor, so it's good against other autocannons and such, and it's protecting a light 220 engine rather than the standard one. The arms are equipped with actuator enhancement systems to allow the pilots to be a little bit more accurate in terms of their firepower, and what it loads is an Ultra AC-10 with 3 tons of ammo, and an MML-5 which allows you to shoot both SRMs and LRMs. The ammo bins are also protected by Case 2, making it fairly reliable. I've only really seen this one a few times, probably not my favorite refit of the design, but it's something that follows the original idea fairly well. Where do I think the Hoplite will go? Well, honestly, I'm not sure at this point. Is it going to stick around is the better question, because that Falcon refit is just a stopgap machine. Pretty sure it's not going to stay in production, and it's not going to be something that they're going to export, and it's not cheap enough to really be bought by just about everyone. The modern Hoplite C from the Dragoons is pretty darn good, but you can't build it in very large amount, if at all. And they have a weird 4X experimental one using a composite structure and all sorts of fancy things that never really reached production. We're in an era where we have modernized Wolverine, Griffins, and Shadowhawks. There's not really any points to put a lot of money on a complex and very advanced Hoplite. If you wanted something fairly advanced and fairly fancy, you just turn to the 275 Mafia and you start buying parts for those. So the Hoplite is in that weird category where it exists because people are still using it, but I don't know where it's going to go. So I thank you very much for listening to me for so long. I hope you guys have a very nice rest of your day. I'll see you guys later. Bye-bye.